not so hard, actually.
It's not. It's a certain nerdy look.
Even worse for the economics stuff.
Well, I was probably applying the same filter. Well, I was actually also, I had a conversation with Kat, and I said to him, you know, a lot of conventions, you notice things different about this convention or different conventions, and I said, yeah, tipsy.
What? The Academy?
From the AEA.
That's close, yeah.
Consistent.
I hadn't thought of it. Maybe I should start my remarks with a joke I often make. Economist is someone who's good with numbers but doesn't have enough personality to be an accountant.
I never heard that joke. That's a good one.
And then I gave a talk once at the National Academy of Sciences on innovation. I just changed it. I said, economist is someone who likes equations but doesn't have enough personality to be a physicist. Got the same laugh.
Well, here you go. Here you go. Maybe you can find a equivalent for you.
Although I did hear a talk just last week.
Are we supposed to?
Just you can turn on the microphone. Be
Right.
turned on and off like. Couldn't be more simple, but you need to. It's being recorded.
No pressure.
These are my instructions.
Oh God. Can we just bribe you into like cutting off our parts?
Yeah, of course.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2025 team plenary session. We're very happy to see many of you. I can see that like when we're teaching, some people are afraid of the first row. So we can say that we don't bite here as well as we don't bite the students. But I'm very happy to see many of you here to discuss a topic that I think is close to every one of us as academics, as we're going to talk about university and innovation and the evolving roles of universities in these uncertain times. So I'm Valentina Tartari. I'm the program chair of the team division. You're going to see me just now, and then I'm going to leave the floor to our chair of the session. But I just want to welcome you and actually give a thank to our speakers for taking the time to being with us this afternoon. So thank you very much. And to the chair, Keld, to agreeing to chair the session. And while we were discussing just in the few minutes before, we've noticed that the team plenary session has been known to cause Nobel Prizes. So it may take a couple of years, but people who have sat in your position a couple of years ago ended up getting a Nobel Prize. So, you know, that's something that, you know, we look forward to in the future as well. No pressure. Exactly. So this is it. I just want to remind you, but Keld will do it at the end as well, that after this we have the networking reception, so you can keep talking about what we're going to hear today. And without further ado, Keld, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina. So today's session is on universities and innovation. So it's evolving roles in uncertain times, and we certainly have uncertain times. For instance, today the number of students admitted to Danish universities were published, and the government has restricted this by 10%. So the number of students that will not enter university here is up by the same 10%. So there you are. There's a lot of interventions by politicians and so on in the things that we do at the universities. Denmark is not the country that's the worst hit by it, but it also happens here. So it's certainly a topic that's worth a discussion. So to do this, we have a very, very strong panel. We have Michaël Bikard here from INSEAD. We have Adam Jaffe from Brandeis University, Janet Bercovitz, University of Colorado, and Jerry Davis from the University of Michigan to discuss these issues. And they have sort of lifted just a millimeter of what they're going to talk about to me. So Michaël is going to take a historical perspective on the university, I've been informed, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Adam, it's a relationship between outputs of university, innovation and growth, and also something about the various types of impacts that universities have. Related to that is Janet. It's about the variety of missions that universities have and the challenges this gives, taking an org and management perspective, and as one could imagine. And then Jerry at the end, that's threats to higher education, and it's threats from both authoritarian forces in the societies we live in, so definitely something that's very much at the forefront right now, and then also perhaps related to this, perhaps not related to this, is the threat of AI to higher education. So we are going to do it in the following way. We are going to have an opening round of our 4 speakers where they give each of their perspectives. This will last approximately 20 minutes. I'll do my best to keep the time because I know they have a lot of important stuff to say. They should keep some of the gunpowder dry afterwards because we are going to have, after that, a 40 minutes round where I will pose questions and you will say some stuff, and then we have the possibility to have Q&A from the audience here. So with no further ado, Michaël, and I promise to put on this slide here, and if you can't see it, it is Michaël himself as a Viking, and perhaps it's a Kronborg castle here in Denmark in the background. So please.
Thank you, Keld. Yeah, I've asked, I figured we're in Copenhagen, we can't just like leave the city without seeing Vikings and talking with Vikings. And I figured, you know, I have the chance to talk about university innovation, so let's just talk about Vikings. And yeah, this is produced by ChatGPT, so you see the level of technology. You won't see that in the OMT division. All right, so imagine you are a Viking. It's year 1000, and you're standing on a wooden ship leaving Copenhagen on your way to Greenland. There is no map, no compass, no GPS. Only the stars, the winds, and a crystal called the sunstone to guide you across the Atlantic. The Vikings reached North America centuries before Columbus did. But they left no detailed map, no written records, no systematic way to teach or improve the navigation technique. In the absence of a system for preserving and transmitting knowledge, even extraordinary discoveries can vanish. The Viking understanding of the Atlantic, of navigation, of America itself was lost. Without institutions like universities, knowledge doesn't survive. Just as the Vikings' era was ending, a new institution was being born, one that could have changed everything. In 1088, in the Italian city of Bologna, students desperate to learn Roman law were frustrated by bad teaching and greedy landlords. It would never happen now today, huh? People have only good teachers. So they pulled their resources together and hired their own professors. Out of this movement came the first university, Universitas Scholarium in Bologna. This new institution enabled something the Vikings never had, a systematic accumulation, preservation, and transmission of knowledge. Had this just happened a few decades earlier, perhaps we would not have needed to rediscover what the Vikings already knew, including North America. Once universities existed, knowledge stopped evaporating and started accumulating. At first, they were mainly about teaching, law, medicine, theology, but over time, they became something far more powerful, places where ideas were tested, challenged, and built upon. Because of this development, Isaac Newton, sitting in Cambridge in the late 1600s, could famously say, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. By the 20th century, here in Copenhagen, Niels Bohr was able to pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake as he laid the foundation of quantum theory's Copenhagen interpretation. And today, as we sit here, we can't ignore that one of the most valuable companies in Europe, Novo Nordisk, owes much of its success to academic advances in the field of biomedical and pharmaceutical research. There might be turmoil in the world, but moments like this remind us of what we have inherited, a 1,000-year-old institution born to solve a real problem, the preservation and transmission of knowledge. Who knows? Without institutions like universities, we might still be tempted to get on ships to see what we find if we just simply sail westwards. Perhaps I should end with a quote by another well-known Danish scientist, Tycho Brahe, once said that scientists must be cosmopolitan because ignorant statesmen cannot be expected to value their services. These words resonate powerfully today, and I am thrilled that sessions like this one remind us to keep demonstrating the value of what we do, not only to ignorant statesmen, but to society as a whole.
Okay, so I've been doing this for a while. I know correlation is not causality, but if you look at this panel and compare it to the picture that was up there a while ago, studying universities turns your hair white. Anyway, I was trying to think, you know, over the years that I've been thinking about this sort of stuff. The Bayh-Dole Act in the United States, which was an important component in kind of launching the late 20th century development of the university and its relationship to the commercial sector, that was passed while I was in graduate school. So it's sort of, it has been my career. And the thought that came to me was, when I started in this, you could walk through Harvard Square and you could tell which of the students were at Harvard and which of the students came from MIT. Because the ones from Harvard were dressed really nicely, and the ones from MIT were all dressed like they didn't care what they looked like. That's no longer true. Now, none of the students care what they look like. And if you eavesdrop in their conversations, they're all talking. Oh, let me say one other thing. And back then, the students from Harvard were all talking about going into consulting, and the students from MIT were all either going to go work for GE or for Merck. Now, the students are all talking about either starting a company or going to work for a company that their friends started. And I think that really is kind of the time period that we live in. Now, from a research perspective, as I look back on it, when I wrote my first paper on this topic, I just reported correlations. And I think there's a little, I didn't go back and look at the paper, I think there's a little bit in there about like, well, it's just correlations, but we think that universities really are causing innovation. That wouldn't fly today. That paper would not get published today. So I think one of the things that has really changed is we've spent the last few decades proving to ourselves what we already knew, which was that there really is a causal relationship between universities and innovation and economic growth. Now, I made this one little table, and I made this table because I'm an economist. I've never spoken at an AOM meeting before. I did teach for a couple years recently at the Sloan School, and Pierre Azoulay told me that if you're going to teach at a business school, every idea you wish your students to understand, you have to be able to summarize it in a 2x2 matrix. Now, I couldn't get there, but I got to 2x3. So I hope you'll let me continue. I thought this would just be useful as a way of just kind of a framework for thinking about what is it that universities do. And roughly speaking, I think it's helpful to think that there's kind of three categories of things that come out of universities. There's knowledge, there's human capital, which is basically knowledge embodied in people. And you could stop there, I would argue. Analytically, on some very deep level, you could stop with those two. But if you sort of just look around Silicon Valley or Boston or Israel, it does seem like startup of firms actually is a particularly important phenomenon kind of in its own right. And so I think it's useful to identify that as a third sort of channel of university impact. And then I make this distinction between the local and the global. And I do that because both the policy questions that come up and the research methods you use to try to measure these impacts are kind of different if you're thinking about it from the perspective of the impact on the local region or if you're thinking about the global impact. Now, it could be, on some level, the local sort of adds up to the global, so you could say it's all one thing. But I think if you're actually involved in this, it doesn't feel that way. If you're the mayor of Boston, you don't care that some of the economic development that is in some sense caused by MIT and Harvard is sucked out of other places. That doesn't matter to you. But it does matter if you're, the United States or the world. And then finally, I'll just say, when we look at the last few decades, we've lived in a world in which, without anybody thinking about it that much, both the US and the rest of the world have sort of gone along with a model in which the US created knowledge for the benefit of the world and didn't worry that much about whether they were capturing the benefits. But that seems to have changed in the last year or so. And so we could talk about that more in the discussion. Thank you.
So I want to build on both what Michaël and Adam have said, because one of the things that I want to stress is if you think about the university's role on innovation and growth, we have so many dimensions that we're contributing to. So we contribute by educating students and providing that human capital, that pipeline into industry. We contribute by just discovery and finding breakthrough knowledge that sets up emerging industries. We contribute by technology transfer and contributing to the markets for technology. We spin out academic startups. We're called on to do regional development. We're called on to help with, responding to grand challenges, right? So there's a lot of things going on, and one of the questions is, well, if you're a university, how do you prioritize and balance all these different missions? And it's a real challenge, and it's getting more challenging as all these changes are our current situation. So I'm going to say, on the whole, universities haven't had an impact in all these areas, but again, we've got to deal with this challenge. So I want to just hit on a couple points that I want us to think about. I'll give you some opinions, and you can feel free to disagree with me. But the first thing I want to do is I want to step back. I'm going to give it to you from a little bit from a U.S. perspective, because that's what I study and that's what I know. But the first thing is a little bit of a pet peeve. We have this tendency for universities to look at this and look at the well-performing universities like MIT or Stanford and say, hey, I've got to be like that too. And we're doing way too much imitation, where what we really need to do if we're going to cover all those different missions is to take more of a differentiated approach to what we do as universities and take different roles. And so it's just not about modeling. We shouldn't all be the same. We want to have related missions, but not the same mission. So that would be my first pet peeve that we have an issue with. The second thing I guess I'd like to talk to is a little bit about the infrastructure. And I want to come back to the history, because if you look at the infrastructure, U.S., a lot of it started with the post-World War infrastructure, where there was a lot of government funding for research. And about 90% of all funding was coming out of the government. And so what you saw at universities was this building of an infrastructure to manage government grants, right? And it was all about administration, reporting, dispersing funds. But that's then got not replaced, but got added to with the passage of the Bayh-Dole, where all of a sudden it was about, okay, let's see about getting the technology out of the university and getting it commercialized. And so then we had a whole infrastructure being built up with licensing offices. So we kind of went from regulation to transaction. And I'll step back and say, the one thing we have to realize is that most universities make no money from their licensing. And in fact, it's money sinks. So we got to think about, what are we actually doing here, and is this the right form? And then now, what you have now is that, okay, with the reduction in government funding that we're seeing, it was flat for a while, and now it's starting to come down. In our situation in the US, it's getting frozen. And so there's a question, well, can we rely either on that first administrative and government grant? Can we rely on tech transfer? Because most of that's coming from government-funded research. So what's the next move? How are we going to fund this research enterprise? And so a lot of folks are out there talking about, well, we got to go back to more collaboration with industry, with philanthropy, with other things. So then all of a sudden, we've got a different mode. We've got to build up an infrastructure about collaboration. So how are we going to do that? And what's the difference that we're going to need to bring into place? So I just want you all to think about that. One other thing I want to talk about, I guess, is the talent pipeline. Because one of the issues we have now is this question about foreign students, right? And in the US, there's a disproportionate amount of the students that are actually doing STEM and doing PhDs are foreign students. And if we cut that off, we're going to have an issue with the pipeline into the companies. And also, not only that, there's an issue about the pipeline to spin-offs, because a lot of times the faculty member may have that breakthrough idea, but it's actually his PhD students, his or her PhD students, that are building the company or that are running it. And so if we cut that off, then we're going to have that other issue of, will we be able to manage the spin-outs coming out of our organization? So I think we have a lot of challenges ahead. I've got a list of more, but I think I'll stop here and give it to Jerry and let him be more controversial.
I'll try to be controversial. Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really an OMT guy, through and through, so I feel like an immigrant here. And if this were my country, I'd be very anxious on leaving the room, but sorry. So, controversy number one, thank you for following. But Adam was describing some of the outputs that we get from research, like the essential ingredient in our contribution to innovation and growth at the university is our research enterprise. This can lead to patents, insights, student startups, the Google algorithm. All of these things came out of the research enterprise. But the major currency for research is the scholarly publication. And I want to talk a bit about why I am anxious about the world of scholarly publishing because of technology and innovation. So technology has been a major driver of changes in the ecosystem of scholarly journals. I was a journal editor for 5 years and got to know the insides of this thing. And essentially, short version is the web made it possible to see a proliferation of journals and publications. The number of journals in management went up by 400% over about 25 years, not just because of reclassifications. Online publishing means that there's essentially no limit to the number of articles that can be published. If you post a PDF online, that can count as a publication. And so the journal that I used to edit, Administrative Science Quarterly, used to publish about 24 papers a year. The Journal of Business Ethics published 270, and I thought, that's an astounding number. How do they do that? Sustainability publishes 17,000 articles per year. 17,000 articles per year.
That's not sustainable.
Word. And yet, yeah, especially because they charge $2,800 as an article processing fee to post a PDF online, which is an amazing business model that requires genius. So because of the web, the number of annual articles in the Web of Science went up about 50% from 2016 to 2022. So 50% is a big number. So much science is being done. Great, so much more for us to read and spend our time processing. We should all be delighted that there's more presents under the Christmas tree. But I would point out that publishers are not in the business of truth. They're in the business of making money from publishing. They're not in the business of promulgating truth. I don't think the Elsevier website mentions truth from anywhere that I've seen. And they don't get rewarded for publishing the truest things. They get rewarded through revenues from authors and others. And because of this, they have incentives to proliferate the number of journals and articles and to do things like weaponizing open access, charging authors $2,000 to $3,000 per article. Open access was originally a very optimistic movement, that the people are paying for science, they should be able to access it for free. And the idea of anywhere in the world, if you've got a smartphone, you can read every article, that sounds so great in principle, but it's been weaponized to be a profit engine for publishers that I don't love. Well, how do you navigate all of this bounty of tens of thousands of articles that might potentially be interesting? Traditionally, we've used the journal impact factor to know what's a good journal, and Google Scholar to know what's a good article and who's a smart and impactful author. And I'm here to tell you that both of these are completely corrupt metrics that we should abandon immediately. They're distorting our mission completely. Journal impact factor is the average citation this year to articles published in the previous 2 years. And there's a very clear recipe for cooking the journal impact factor, a combination of self-citations, but publishing articles in sustainability, which remember, 17,000 a year, not that selective. Publish a few articles in sustainability that publish everything in your, that cite every articles in your home journal in alphabetical order. Everything you've published in the last 2 years, poof, you're the Journal of Innovation and Knowledge, the second most impactful journal in management. So I've got the deets on this if you're interested, but it's been thoroughly corrupted. Impact factors, nonsense, abandon it immediately. Google Scholar, it's less obvious to people it's completely opaque, obviously, if you've ever used it. But if you go to Fiverr, the online platform, and type in Google Scholar, you will see that there are literally dozens of vendors who will sell you Google Scholar citations. So if anybody's going up for tenure this fall, I don't know if your research budget will cover phony citations, but there is a service that will do that. So our metrics for navigating quality and impact are completely nonsense at this point, and this is, I think, bad. Okay, now imagine that you throw generative AI into this context, because all of this corruption had happened before we got to the current era in 2023. We've already seen early signs of AI writing papers, AI reviewing papers, savvy authors putting in white type in their AI-written papers to get past the AI-generated reviewers and publications online. So we can already, you don't have to be Cory Doctorow to figure out what's going to happen next with our publication system. So that was to make you a little bit depressed. Now add in authoritarianism. So imagine that you have authoritarian governments that hate and resent higher education, and they want to control what kinds of topics can be studied, and they want to drastically cut funding for science and technology and medicine, as is happening in some unnamed countries that I am familiar with. But imagine Viktor Orban controls Google Scholar. So you type in some forbidden topics and, hey, nothing turns up, or people that write about gender or race or socialism or what have you, those articles don't feature in the Google Scholar results. Because we've so concentrated our access to the literature, it creates real dangers, I think. And that gets us back to how we started with Michaël. Like, how did the Vikings end up not being able to preserve their knowledge? I've been thinking a lot about the Roman Empire and the collapse part. Like, how did we go from such a sophisticated system to people eating dirt and wearing burlap and not being able to write down what they know? That's what I'm nervous about these days, that the publication ecosystem plus authoritarianism can create the conditions where we can't preserve that knowledge, that we don't have the capacity to know the truth because there's so much nonsense out there published in these thousands of journals and articles. So it's a little bit controversial, I think.
Okay, some questions. So I'll start with Michaël, but the rest of you feel free to chip in. So you gave this sort of history of the university and how it basically accumulates knowledge and also transfer it. So that's by definition a very important role to have in society. And then you also mentioned various types of things that have been developed in universities that had sort of profound impact on the world where we live in. Now, this is not the only thing that universities do. In fact, if we just look at this city here, there's going to be like thousands of scientists here, and there's somebody like Jens Juul Holst who was part of finding the GLP-1 hormone or defining it, that then has been sort of successfully applied by Novo Nordisk in one of the suburbs to Copenhagen. So that's all nice. Actually, the university here in Copenhagen, when it began, it only had the faculty of theology. And that's, of course, the knowledge of Christianity and so on, and educating priests is, at least at the time, was sort of fairly important. But it just speaks to the issue that universities are heterogeneous in what they produce. They have many universities, not ours, CBS is an independent business school, but in many cases they have a business school, they have a humanities faculty, they might also have engineering and so on. So I would like you to speak a little bit about this. A lot of the growth that has happened in university has been in social science and in humanities. And due to this structural change, have you then maybe lost a little bit of connection between science and society, if you like, or industry? I mean, what I want to talk about, that really, it may be that some areas have greater difficulties in transferring this knowledge to wider society, and that may also include business schools, unfortunately.
And in your mind, humanities is one of them, or do they have more impact?
I would also rank them, at least the perception around here is that they have the same or less impact than business schools, as opposed to, let's say, engineering or biology and things like this. You talked about astronomy before. Obviously, this has also had impacts on society in many different ways.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I think it drives home one of the things that, going back to what Adam was saying earlier about the different ways in which we try to spread some of the knowledge that we accumulate inside universities through our teaching and potentially through our technology transfer and potentially our startup, etc. There is, I guess, another channel, which is the news media and kind of the public discourse and social media or the media in general at the forum. And if you think of what part of those conversations on that forum are actually capturing by science, or at least science-based stuff, right? It does feel like this is an important metric that we're not even studying that much, frankly, because we've been stuck with those patent citations, and I'm guilty as charged. But like, it does feel like there is a broader question about the impact of science and the extent to which science is getting out, not through technology, just like, as in going beyond fake news, like how much of the conversation out there are actually foundationed in science. It does feel like a bit of a blind spot, at least on the research side, and something that I would love to explore, and I have some conversation with some people to look into this. I'm not sure that I'm actually answering.
Right, it's a difficult question to answer. I don't know if somebody else from the panel want to chip in on this sort of structural change. At least here, it's more the softer areas that have grown in proportion. I mean, the whole sector has grown tremendously, but it is a softer sector. So when tertiary education, for instance, now is so big. The growth has more been in those areas, and I can include social sciences to this as well.
So one of the things I've been hearing is that if we want to really, get the most out of it, we should be really pushing interdisciplinary and actually double majors for most folks, so that folks that are in science get literacy in the humanities, and folks that are in the humanities end up with some scientific and technical literacy, so that we can do a better job of actually speaking to each other and then understanding the relevance of what each party does.
I thought you were going to pick up your diversity pet peeve. I mean, it seems to me that part of what you're saying is that different universities do different things.
Right.
And to pick up slightly on what Jerry was saying, although it's a slightly different point, is I think there is an issue that if we define innovation broadly, not define it in terms of the typical measures of patents or whatever, but define it as doing new, valuable things, then there's no reason why the humanities can't be seen as, and shouldn't be seen as contributing to innovation, but it's a measurement problem. It's much harder to concretely identify those effects, but that doesn't mean they're not real.
Okay, so a follow-up question on this to an extent. Now, Adam, you talked in your talk about the famous square battles in Cambridge in Massachusetts, and of course it's beyond doubt that Harvard and MIT have made significant impact on the rest of society. Well, of course, there's also heterogeneity here. There's heterogeneity across fields within a university, but there's also heterogeneity among universities, and few universities in the world would produce knowledge at that level. Let's say we count the number of Nobel Prize winners or something like that. So what's the role of, let's say, lower-ranked universities? I mean, should we say each country, if you like, so here in Denmark, there should be University of Denmark, and that's it, and then we focus the elite there? Or is there a special role or another role perhaps for another type of university that is not the MIT or not the Harvard in terms of publication output and patents, and you have it?
Just a couple of thoughts on that. The first thing that flashes through my mind is an old argument in sort of economics of innovation about incremental innovation versus radical or impactful innovation. And the sum total of incremental innovation is actually quite important. Mm-hmm. And so while I think, you could say that there are a lot of universities that don't have any Nobel Prize winners, I don't think it follows from that what they're doing is not contributing to human knowledge. And then the second thing I would say is that I think the training aspect of what universities do is also very important. And I don't actually accept that because we've got the web and soon we're going to have AI, that the transfer and absorption of knowledge is a non-issue. I still think it's actually quite important to embed knowledge and skills in human beings. And so I think that there is a role for the Harvards and MITs, but there's also a role for other institutions as well. And what's exactly the right balance between, the top places and how many other places, that's a hard problem. Mm. I do think there are many roles to be played.
Right. Thanks. Then from Janet's talk, I mean, there are these different channels of positive effects, you can say, of having universities. But you can also say, I mean, as a knowledge creator, then there are many other knowledge creators in society. That firms produce a lot of knowledge, consultancy firms do, and so on. So in this, we talk about mode 2 and so on. Everybody can contribute knowledge and so on. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a university or elsewhere. So what is so special about the university as an institution?
I will have to admit, I went to Berkeley, and when I first got to Berkeley, there were signs all over that said question authority, and I think that's one of the things that makes it different, that you're asked to question, and other institutions don't ask you to question in the same way.
Yeah, I'm actually, this is going to be very non-obvious. I think that the peer review process, that the university is a receptacle that the peer review process, to my mind, is the closest that we get as humans to a good way to get close to the truth. That there aren't other institutions in society that I can think of, maybe courts, if we like the way that courts work, but that oppositional aspect to the peer review process, double blind, that you say, here's my best shot at getting this right, and then 3 really smart people, and you don't know their names, their job is to find all the ways why you're wrong, and through that back and forth, you get as close as you're likely to get to a pretty good answer. It won't be perfect, but I can't think of any other institution in society like that peer review process that forces us to get as close as we can to making a persuasive case to smart, critical people. And without universities, I don't know who's going to be submitting things to double-blind peer review or actually getting paid to take spare free time to do the evaluation as reviewers.
Right, so while we are at the issue of universities and how we measure things, impact factors, and also Google Scholar citations at the individual level. So of course that's sort of quite a negative story. At the Druid, we had several years ago a debate about the usefulness of citations, and Ben Martin from Spru did a sort of an act where he was like an alcoholic, but he was now getting off these bibliometric measures due to the exact same issues that you were mentioning, the ability to manipulate and at various levels, producing working papers that cite your own stuff and things like this to get more Google Scholar citations. But how do we fix this? And I'm going to be a little bit more challenging than just saying, okay, we have to go back and read the papers. I totally agree, we need to read the papers. But you would like also to have some quant stuff when you read the paper. So I think there's some demand for, typically if I write a letter, I would start with sort of just, listing where the publications have come out and how many citations there are. I think that's sort of normal. And then I go into sort of, then I state my opinion about them, and even if it went in Org Science, I may or may not like it. But it is a starting point that it went in Org Science, and it does sort of set a certain standard. So the question is, what do we do when the current measures are so problematic? But it's very difficult to challenge your view on this. I think it is exactly the way you describe. But what do we do about it?
So 2 levels of thoughts here. One is that at the journal level, we could just say, here's a set of criteria that journals need to be evaluated by, that you're not going to be in the FT50 or you're not going to be in the UT Dallas or whatever. There's a set of criteria that we hold journals to about transparency, rigor, the thoughtfulness of the review process. You could ask how many editors, when you send things out for review, how many reviewers say yes? And if the answer is less than 1%, I'm guessing that's going to be the story for sustainability. That's a bad sign. That's not a sign that reviewers are really devoted to that process. So if we could create, I think, a set of rigorous evaluations of the journal's internal processes, even if nobody cites it, but it's made it through a very rigorous hurdle, I think that should count. Because citations have become so debased, I think we should just abandon that one immediately. The next time anyone writes a tenure review letter that includes Google Scholar, we should just shred it. I'm just telling you that now. Every time I read letters that go to Google Scholar to say this person's impactful, it makes me very unhappy. But we could also use AI in thoughtful ways. So imagine that instead of just counting the number of citations in Google Scholar, we said, okay, I'm going to crawl every paper that cited Adam's latest work on topic X. And I'm going to see, was it just a perfunctory cite, or did they actually engage with him? Like, is it real impact and thoughtfulness, or is it just who you know matters, Granovetter, 1985, which is a lot of citations. So we could use the tools to better track the impact of people's work. Not every day, but certainly when people are going up for important reviews, that might be a way to get at it.
Right, thanks. So several of you, including Janet, for instance, I think also Adam sort of alluded to this issue that maybe, I certainly share this idea that perhaps the most critical aspect of university education is when we train our students and send them out in society. there's a lot to be said for scientific method and a scientific thinking around problems, doing it in a systematic way as Michaël would have it. But then we also heard about the university as a basis of entrepreneurship. So is a university, is that a good sort of starting point for entrepreneurship? Is that sort of really the new role? Adam, you were mentioning that now they don't want to work for Merck and other prestigious companies anymore. It's really about the new startup and things like this. But is the university, I mean, it's obvious that there's a selection effect here. The smart people go to MIT and Howard and so on. But the question is, how much do they get out of being at the university when they started? Is that the right place?
I get to go first. So I think, I think Janet hit the nail on the head in saying, well, one of the challenges with being a university is that there are these multiple missions. And it's not entirely clear how given institutions even think about that problem. I think that the evidence suggests that there is something, that there is kind of a bit of a secret sauce about the way in which the top PhD programs in the sciences breed entrepreneurs. And I think that the evidence suggests that is a valuable thing for society. I certainly don't think it is the only valuable thing that universities do, and it may not even be the most valuable thing. And even at Harvard and MIT, there are plenty of people who aren't interested in that. And so I think there is a social / organizational problem for these institutions of how to juggle doing different things. But, you know, we're human, we can do that. So I don't see it as sort of a fundamental problem. I see it more as, if you'll pardon the expression, a management problem. I mean, it's challenging to do a bunch of different things at the same time, but human organizations do it.
I often tell my students, I teach an innovation course to MBAs at INSEAD, and I often tell my students that there will be companies going to INSEAD to try to recruit them, but there will not be companies going, or anyone going to INSEAD and telling them, well, you should just go and start a company. It's not as obvious. Now, there's a question that I think is a very worthwhile question that many of you may be doing research on, which is, should we want to have more entrepreneurs in society? But I think a lot of people would say yes, or at least the fact that if we, to the extent that we want more innovation in a world of unknown unknowns, then we probably do want people to try things out and experiment in a safer place. And it strikes me that universities as institutions are maybe not the best solution, but a good solution for that in terms of providing kind of a safe sandbox part of someone's career where they can both have access to potential co-founders and knowledge and potentially institutionalized access to skills. By that I mean, you know, potential lawyers or whatever else, like alumni who is going to give advice, or professor going to give advice, whatever. All these things mean that there is an opportunity that universities have to play that role of a chance in someone's career to experiment and try things out. And to the extent that we believe that it's something good for society, then it feels like the university is actually well positioned to play that role.
Okay, let me just challenge that a little. I don't think I sort of fundamentally disagree with this, but at least if I look at CBS, probably what we are not best at is running businesses and making money in a way. So I think we are better at publishing in research policy and SMJ than we are our students are actually very good entrepreneurs, so that's something else, but it's just that the skill set that we have as professors don't fit that so well. So I think that this sort of poses challenges to universities to also draw on other skill sets to nurture entrepreneurship, because surely the faculty, with some exceptions I'm sure, would not be the best fit to do that. So this is sort of like an overall question. Would there then be sort of a need for universities to adopt and perhaps also employ other people with other backgrounds and draw on entrepreneurs with entrepreneurial experience and this sort of thing?
I'll jump in. I think, yes, you want to draw on people that have the experience, but I also think we have a really big role. We teach startup a lot, and I think startup is just one piece of it. What we need to teach is growth, and I think what we know and what we can share is really important for thinking about how do you actually grow an organization, which is necessary because so many startups fail in the growth stage, not in the startup stage. And it's also a career path for people. It's a different career path, but it is a career path, and I think that's where we can add value.
And I want to stick up for CBS as a school and what it is that we are good at publications more than starting businesses. But I think that we could reorient a bit using our installed base of faculty. If you ask your finance faculty, what are the 5 most interesting new ways to raise capital? They'll say, well, there's online crowdfunding, you could do revenue share agreements. And if you ask the law faculty, what are 5 new legal structures that firms could be embedded in? It could be a perpetual purpose trust or an LLC or a benefit corporation, société à mission. Like we have all of the raw materials of starting a business and expertise on capital, labor, supply, distribution, legal forms, and so on. So maybe one of the things that business schools could be doing, we're not going to be doing software or medical devices or drugs that could be high growth businesses. That's not the innovation that we're good at, but we are good at thinking about the building blocks of creating enterprises. And for me, optimistically would be, can we abandon the VC-funded high growth model, which is this tyrannical, dull, rare, only applies to 1 in 10,000 businesses. There's a lot more ways that you can create an enterprise than just VC-funded high growth. We could be enabling people to create really interesting new forms of that look more like Novo Nordisk rather than Juul or whatever.
So in defense of my own school, actually, we have a very successful incubator where actually students from the technical universities come to our school to do entrepreneurship. It's sort of, the flow is not the other way around, because when they are very good technically, they need to know about business models and, these kind of things that we do know about CBS. I'm just thinking about starting a business per se, and that's, few faculty have experience in that direction, but we have something to say about that. Okay, very good. I would like to change the focus a little bit, maybe to the more controversial part. Geopolitical things that have happened, US politics, things that are affecting us all, but the US more than anyone. So, Adam, you said some stuff about trying. My interpretation of this was that yes, universities historically have produced a lot of spillovers, and they are global in scale. So this means that if you produce something at MIT, you can benefit from this in Copenhagen, but you can also benefit from it in Beijing, and that is seen now to be less desirable than it was, let's say, even 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. So what is it that governments are now trying to do to restrict spillovers, and do you think that will be successful?
Well, I wish I knew the answers. I guess what I would say is, from my perspective, which is like on alternate days, I try to think about this and then on the next day just stick my head in the sand and pretend it's all not happening because it's too painful to think about. But when I'm thinking about it, I think it is helpful to kind of break it into 2 pieces. I think some fraction of what's going on in the U.S. today is, not to put too fine a point on it, just insanity, and it's just we have a narcissist who, I don't think he even cares what actually happens. He does stuff just because it's fun to break things, and on my good days, I believe that will eventually go away. So let's just kind of admit that that's there and put it to one side. I think there is an underlying something there as well, though, which, at least as I see it from the perspective of the U.S., which is a growing short-sightedness, selfishness, and fundamental kind of distrust of knowledge and expertise. And I think those are more fundamental, and it's not as clear to me that those are going to go away. So, you know, new knowledge is the ultimate public good, right? I mean, and public goods can only be produced if there's a way for the society to collectively bring resources to bear, where you take a little bit out of everyone's pocket and you put it into this public good. And that's true whether you're talking about new knowledge or, you know, other public goods. And I do fear that we sort of didn't realize it at the time, but the second half or the last third of the 20th century was a historically unique period in terms of our willingness collectively to sort of spend our resources on public goods, broadly defined. And it was a good thing. And I think it you know, these things, I guess, go
So if I get you correctly, if I go back to my question, then what you're saying is that the way that one would then restrict the spillovers is simply by reducing significantly investment in this area. Yes. And then, of course, you also don't have, so you cannot really differentiate between localized and global spillovers. So the only solution will be to cut the system and then not have any potential spillovers at all, or less.
That's what I see.
Right.
Is that we're entering a period, we have entered a period in which the collective willingness to invest in public goods is just not what it used to be. And that is going to be a bad thing. But I don't know what to do about it.
Right. Michaël?
Yeah, in the spirit of unsubstantiated, unbased claims and predictions.
We are sort of in that business in this. So
Yeah, this is what
allow
we're
us
doing
to
as researchers, right?
allow us to speculate.
Exactly. I was talking to my friend Jan Boang yesterday, and he was telling me about one of his papers. Like, Trump could not have done better for China's innovation than what he's doing. Like, the motivation and the money and the resources and the energy going to innovation in China is better, bigger than ever. They are catching up very, very quickly. And my prediction, again, it's just my prediction, is that very quickly they will start overtaking, there will be a Sputnik moment, they will start overtaking America in science, and then what? We'll see. But we know what happened with the Sputnik moment.
Any other reactions to
Well,
that?
just, I think that's a good observation, and I think that's where these two distinct things that I mentioned interplay, because as long as Trump is in, it doesn't matter, because he doesn't care. But I think it is interesting to wonder, when we get to that next phase, will the competitive response, I think you're exactly right about China, will that kick in? And then maybe we would get back onto some different course.
So, I mean, we may have 3.5 years left of Trump, but I think sort of I would like to sort of pose a more general question that has to do with, to what extent is a university as an institution, let's say at least in the free world, the world where we sort of treasure freedom of speech and freedom of thought and so on, to what extent is it really under threat? Does this extend beyond the United States? So I would like to have sort of all of your takes on this issue, and you feel free to speculate.
Well, one of the odd things about how this is playing out in the U.S. is we don't have nationally funded universities other than the service academies. They're funded at the state level. And so you see a great heterogeneity among the 50 states in terms of what the universities are doing and the extent to which you still have academic freedom and tenure is still meaningful. There's several university systems funded by their legislatures that are requiring faculty to publish all of their syllabi online so that parents or others can scan to see if they mention words like diversity or equity. And it turns out the models are dumb enough that if you're teaching a class on private equity, you might be flagged for violating the anti-DEI rules. But then you go to other states and it's really different. And so there's not like, it's a very uneven landscape in the American context where things are, just south of me is Ohio, which is now frozen Florida, and they recently passed a bill in the Senate that has post-tenure review, that's limiting academic freedom, that's limiting what can be studied or taught in the classroom. And my place, I get to act like I do. So there's not an easy answer or a universal one. It's that there's going to be a lot of variability, I think, across the states. It happens that California and Massachusetts are the ones that produce most of the business-worthy ideas, and they're doing okay. So Adam or Janet might.
Right. Yeah. So there's sort of the more. Let's say the more the general aspect I would like to come back to, sort of, if we look beyond Trump. I mean, it's hard not to share the pessimistic picture right now, but after all, as Michaël indicated, so universities have now a 1,000-year history, and so it turned out to be a pretty stable. The Roman Empire was pretty stable. It also lasted 1,000 years. But I'm not sure that we ended the Roman Empire here. So the question for me is, okay, 3.5 years, okay, the crisis is probably not over, but there's also some resilience in the system. These institutions have worked well. In many countries, there are some safeguarding mechanisms that sort of protect some of these rights, and I guess we have to sort of be a bit modest in what we can do right now. But so, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the survival of this very old and well-proven system?
Well, I think that when something starts, it will end. And just like every organization or every institution, there will be, or there is, an expiry date. Now, have we reached the expiry date of universities and institutions? Well, obviously, I mean a completely biased opinion. I hope not. But I do see, the review system, it was invented. It was not. It didn't come from God, or someone invented it. Academic journals were invented. There was a time before and there was a time after. I do get a little bit worried when I see the amount of inertia that we have, how we seem to be stuck with this money, this organization that are making money out of our free time, kind of reviewing and doing all this public service, just because there is, I guess, some kind of coordination issue, whereby we cannot, we do all this work for free, and then we can get together to just do it online in a way that makes sense. And so we keep just pouring money at those organizations. I get worried about that, and I do think that the way that we organize today is probably not adapted to the future we're going into. So I think sessions like this one, where we can collectively kind of share ideas, are really important.
I think that's an important point, this issue of, so one thing is 1,000 years, but it has not been 1,000 years unchanged, so there is a need for adaptability as we move along, and if we want to survive also this era here, then institutions needs to adapt to the reality that we are in. Yeah, Jerry?
I would just point out in the U.S., college debt outstanding is $1.7 trillion. So bigger than the mortgage market, credit cards. Americans, when they go to college, spend astounding amounts of money. The average student debtor owes $40,000, which I think is a lot. Those people will not be able to buy houses soon. And there's a lot of resentment against universities charging $70,000 per year to get a degree. And I think this is powering a populist backlash against universities and their cost. And I think cost can be a very powerful battering ram to take on universities. The reason why you're not seeing people doing bonfires in the streets because they see universities being attacked is that they don't love universities that much. We have not necessarily covered ourselves in glory, and I think there's a lot of resentment about well-paid elites and how much we charge their kids to go to school. And I don't have a great answer for that. They're not wrong. 1.7 trillion is kind of a lot of money. And so that creates a political opening for the kind of revanchist policies that we're seeing taking on universities. If I had to make my dystopian prediction for the next 2 years, not to pile on with, but we'll be seeing sort of fake AI-based colleges where people are interacting with chatbots and taking their tests through chatbots, and I think we'll see a lot of AI-based education that masquerades as college, but it's a lot cheaper. And if that becomes accepted as a form of credentialing, I think we're in some serious trouble.
If I can just make a remark on that, I mean, so that you can sort of consider two roles of universities. So one is what we like to think about, that is that we teach students stuff that's really useful and that they can apply also when they leave the university. The other one is that we use certification of, we certify students and somehow rank order them before they go into business. So that's another role that's fairly important. And what I hear you saying is that this second role is getting very much challenged by new technologies. And perhaps the solution to this is that we pay more attention to actually teaching real stuff and less to examining students. But that would just be my interpretation of that. Okay. Do you have any final remarks you would like to make? Because you'll get the opportunity, but we have time for questions from the audience. And we also have we are getting recorded, so we need to use the microphones. So if there's an indication.
1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you very much. Julio Serrano from University of Vaasa in Finland. I actually work with AI and AI in business strategy. So I build my own AI models and ML simulations. So we are not strange at our faculty on how disruptive the technology is. And I just want you to contest an opinion that I have, that also my colleagues have, is that over the 100 years ago, and all this time, universities, most universities have adopted a business-like model for outputting students because of the requirement that you just mentioned. So we really think that now that we have this oracle, that we have this technology, universities should go back to the original roots, the Viking era that you were speaking earlier. We really think that universities should go back to this like a moment in time where they were the center of knowledge, and they were not just like an institution that was supposed to just output requirements. So I would like to hear your opinion on this. Like if coming back to the roots it's a solution for this AI problem. Thank you very much.
You're the AI person.
Good. I found once a paper that I sometimes mention to my students when we talk about like why do they ever go to business school and what's the value added, etc. There was this Swedish study that showed that half of the value that people made out of business school came out of who you marry. And because you're going to marry higher income people, then that's basically half of the return on investment from going to business school. That's going to be hard to replicate with AI. Maybe we'll just like start competing against Tinder and these kind of things.
I'm flashing back to some. So I was a dean for a while, and I was a dean at a point in time where like online courses were just starting to take off, and there was a certain amount of discussion in kind of academic management about like what did this mean for universities that students could take these courses online, and I never felt like anybody sort of realistically said, oh, well, it should change our thinking about like what's our comparative advantage. We should think differently about what can we do that students can't get any other way. And I think AI is sort of that on steroids. I mean, I think that there's no question that AI is going to make some of what universities do become more and more clearly not worth what they're paying for. But I still believe that there is a lot that universities could do that at least I don't think AI can do in terms of what we give our students. So in my mind, where it takes us is we need to stop sort of pretending that it doesn't matter how much the technology changes. We can keep teaching the way we've always taught and run our institutions the way we've always run them. So if you ask, I think you a little while back said, are you pessimistic or optimistic? I mean, I don't think universities are going to disappear, but I do think that there's a very deep challenge to them figuring out how to deliver something for society that is really valuable in a way that is continuing to be valuable in the face of new technology.
So I think some of our role is really to get back, as you say, to our roots and really focus more on the critical thinking that, you know, can't be replaced. And I also think there's another question about your two paths. Are we there to train folks into the pipeline? Are we there to create knowledge? I mean, one of the questions is, I think, what is going to be the role for corporations? Because maybe they're going to have to pick up again and start doing more training within their organizations to actually advance them as, you know, whether that should not be our job all the time either.
Of course, that is a shift that we have seen within recent decades, that more and more training has taken place at universities and less at firms. So even if we take the Maersk Corporation here in Copenhagen, they used to train their people from the bottom, but they looked around and they say, well, everybody else, they hire at least people with a bachelor's degree, if not with a master's degree. And then I think they have adopted this uniform. They were probably the last ones to root out of the major companies. So there has been a shift in the role towards more university education and then less within firm education. I think that's fair to say. And maybe we will see a shift back from this. That's, to some extent, that's possible. I think we're seeing that in this country here, where politicians are reducing master's degree from 2 years to 1 year programs, it's because they want to have more. We are facing an aging population. The youth is in high demand, and you want them in the labor market earlier and not to be in the universities as long as they used to be. And maybe we'll see some more of that also in other countries.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Frank van Rijnsoever. I'm from Utrecht University, and thank you for all the insights. It's lots of topics that are challenging our universities. I was wondering, a very important topic, and Keld already mentioned it a little bit, is the idea of that we're becoming more technological sovereign, strategic autonomy. We're getting less international students, and we're all going back towards our on our little islands. So I was wondering, what's your take on that? Is this something that will profoundly change the way we educate and how we do research, or is it? And how are we going to cope with this? Can we cope with this?
Of course, you get the easy ones.
I was reading that long ago. You may have noticed I like history. So I was wondering, where do business schools come from, and why did we ever create business schools? And I found out, without doing very, very deep research, but just like, I found out that some of it had to do about the accumulation of business research in the early 19th century. You know, booming capitalism, there was a sense that everybody was reinventing the wheel, and so you needed a place where that knowledge was going to be accumulated and providing some kind of labor force. So there is a knowledge aspect to this, which is kind of the story of the Vikings as well. But there was also a big status part. There was a business class that was emerging, and that was very low status because they had no degree. And so next to, the typical parents wanted their kids to go to law school or medical school because that was prestigious. There was no business school, there was no degree, right? That was kind of very low status because there was no degree. And so the creation of business school was a response to this dual need of status and knowledge, not just knowledge, right? So in a sense, AI is not an obstacle or danger to status, right? Like to the extent that like we are in the business of providing status, then we're safe. On the knowledge side, probably not. Then there is this other part I was kind of kidding about like competing against Tinder, but we are also in the business of creating connections and creating communities, and that is also not going away. So to the extent that the borders, the world is getting more fragmented, I was just saying, right, there's a sense that, well, maybe we're gonna start creating communities that are more local, and maybe that's a shame. It does feel, so INSEAD was actually a response to World War II. The school was created as a way to create a cross-border elite in Europe. And that's the raison d'être of the school. We are definitely now in a world where we are swimming against the current. And I think that makes our job more important than ever, but potentially more, there is a danger here of being part of this increasing fragmentation of the world.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I believe that the great success of the U.S. in the latter part of the 20th century was to a significant, and this relates to something Janet said, was to a significant extent a result of its being so open. And it was the place that people from all over the world wanted to come to because so much was going on. And I think China, I agree with Michaël, I think China is going to take a great leap forward. But I fundamentally believe that there's a constraint on how successful they can be because it is a closed society. And I think if the U.S. drops this ball, which it looks like we probably, well, we might, I think the middle of the 21st century is going to come to be dominated by someone else who picks it up and is the open country that is the magnet that everyone in the world wants to go to. And I don't think it will be China, and it may not be the U.S., but I think it's going to be someplace that's open and that gets the benefit of that.
So there's a chance for India or perhaps parts of Europe. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, if you just think about it, we all talk about how you need, disparate knowledge, and it's the intersection that creates new knowledge. And it's that openness allowed us to have a lot of different views come together, allow us to create new things. If we close that openness, I think we're going to slow down our growth. And I think it's just like you say, that allow those interactions that are going to have the opportunities.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, it's more of a nature of a comment. My name is Regis Cabral. I'm not an academic. I'm from the business world currently, and I basically don't care a cent about publishing. So, but I do care about what's happening in the world today, and I think that there is a tendency to forget that there is a very strong parallel between what's happening today at the global level and what happened with Europe during the Renaissance. Because we do have many points of contact. The Europeans went out in the great navigations. We are going out into space. The Europeans had the printing press. We have the internet. There are new approaches to medicine. And so do we have that now? We have genetics and all that, and they had just invented the microscope. But when we look at this, we had the arts, the creations and the music, almost everything. But when we look at the Renaissance, we tend to forget that there was a dark side of the Renaissance, because it was the age of the new science, but it was also the age of slavery. And it was also the age of the Inquisition. And the great nation of Spain was taken over by the Inquisition. You had people that were brilliant, were just like expelled. They went to Holland, they went to Turkey, they went to England. There was a movement towards engagement of women in science, all these Spanish women alchemists that were just like brilliant. All of them disappeared. But the Inquisition also went as far as burning the printing presses, establishing committees to control what could be taught in the schools and in the churches. You have the indexes and all those things, and basically the Inquisition became the dominant voice in Spain, and Spain went from having all these tremendous opportunities to become one of the poorest countries in Europe. And the United States is going in that direction. And I think we have to learn from history that what we are confronting is a similar situation. And I really recommend for you know, if you want to have a shocking experience, you should really look at the interfaces between the Heritage Foundation and Opus Dei, because the leader of the Heritage Foundation is actually a member of Opus Dei. So the thing is not exactly, and Opus Dei declared itself as being as the inheritor of the Inquisition. So how do we go about that? I'm not sure that the United States really can be turned and saved, but I think that the Americans and the American culture and the creativity can be saved. And if we cannot save the United States, we should really try to get the best people out. Just like it happened with Spain, people moved into other countries. Maybe we should try the same. And there is going to be a renewal in other places. There's going to be a renewal in other places. Maybe it's going to be Brazil or Australia or India. Maybe something will happen in China. I share your concerns with China. But I think we have to basically, if we have to choose between a new global renaissance and the United States, I take the global renaissance. Thank you.
So any reactions to this? Okay, right. We have one more question. Then.
Sure, I'll follow up. I'm Alicia Main. I'm at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada, and we'd welcome any of our brilliant American colleagues that would like to step outside for a period of time. My question is following up on some of the comments. Thank you for the engaging panel. My question is following up on some of the comments, Janet, that you made about interdisciplinarity and the potential of it and the creativity and the innovation that stems from it. And I wonder, we had some great panels, PDWs, that were TIM and Entrepreneurship Division sponsored over the last couple of days, some on action entrepreneurship and some on science entrepreneurship. And there was a lot of talk about what business schools could do across the university, both at the undergrad and the graduate level in those areas to unlock more innovation from the university and from basic science. But of course, there's a tension with business schools and their other revenue models and their other reputational models. So I would love to hear the panel's thoughts on how universities could unleash innovation and the role business schools could play on that and what tensions you see.
Okay, well, I do see some universities or many universities trying to do some of this interdisciplinary. And I'm going to take back to one point that I didn't get to make earlier, is that we need to really reconsider our reward system. Because right now, we are rewarded very much on those publications, on a lot of, the individual and the individual hero. And if we want to really get the collaboration, we need to figure out a way that collaboration itself is rewarded for the faculty. We just can't ask them to do stuff and keep overburdening them. We got to bring them in and say, this is the path for you going forward. Don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, so thank you. I think it was a absolutely fascinating plenary. Going back to the history question. So of course we had instances in, okay, maybe not as far as the Renaissance, but the recent history with Soviet Union, we can think about Nazi Germany and so on, not comparing. But so what do we know about how the US did it? So how the US captured the talent? What can other countries can learn from it? Other like global firms who sit outside of the US or universities outside of the US. What kind of advice can you give countries, firms, but also kind of our community and how to kind of preserve what we have and might be disappearing now because of what's happening in the US?
So I think that maybe what Adam was talking about, this golden age of American universities, was not an accident. It was engineered by Bavna Bush and other people like him. The reason why, so I'm French, I live in France. The reason why some of the smartest French people live in America is because they're higher salaries. as a result of there being more money for the best researchers, they just move. Because then they end up having more resources and more and better people, and so then you get everything at the same time, right? So to some extent, if you value science, then you value it, and then you pay for it, and then you get the best. And at some point, if you stop valuing it, and we see that with Brexit, right? So looking at what happened to Brexit, London being kind of the best, like where every smart people in Europe used to go to London. That's not true anymore. Now at INSEAD, for the past 2 years, and like forever, the smartest of our students, or like the vast majority of our students, would go to London. And in the past 2 years, it's now Dubai. So, you know, yeah, you can see where you attract, if you value brains, you just pay for them, and they will come.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gaurav. I'm from India. And my question sort of builds on the migration part and what Professor also said about scientists turning entrepreneurs, and especially people who have, you know, especially Indian scientists who have studied at Harvard, MIT, and now are coming back to India, joining Indian academia and starting companies as well as their labs, I mean, apart from that. So academic entrepreneurship, science commercialization, all of this with a massive government support of about more than $1 trillion we have already been promised. So we already see the phenomena in action now. Will this continue to be fertile grounds for theorization and getting acceptance in journals? So sort of a, you know, do you see, I mean, something that what happened in US before, let's say 20, 25 years back, is now happening in India right now. So will it still be fertile ground for new theorization is what I wanted to understand.
I would think so. I think that the more you know, the more questions that open up, and then the differences in the communities will add a lot. I think, yes, it's a fertile ground to study. We just have to expand our questions.
Yeah, I mean, to combine these things, I was going to answer your question. I was going to say it's resources plus openness, which is kind of what you were saying as well. But I will make one observation. Remember how big the numbers are. So like the cuts that we're talking about in the US now, the reductions are tens of billions of dollars on a base of hundreds of billions. So when we're talking about resources, you know, those are big numbers, and China is probably the only country that can actually operate on that scale, and they don't have the openness. So while I'd love to think that India or Switzerland or someplace is going to replace the US as the engine of global science, I think it's important to realize just how big the numbers are.
Paul, for the final question.
All right, I'm biased, but fantastic panel, of course. So for the final question, I'm curious, what's the role of ideas getting harder to find? The death of the Renaissance man, burden of knowledge. Does that mean that we need to expand university education from 5 to 8 years, longer training times? Here in this country, they're going the opposite way, right? They want to reduce the master duration from 2 to 1. So is that a challenge for the university? Do we need to rethink our model, more specialization? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I'll do one thing. I don't know that we want to expand the degree, but I think we want to expand the resources for lifelong learning, because I think all of us have to come back and refurbish what we know and to expand what we know and learn new skills. And we need to find a way to make sure that that's accessible going forward.
Well, all these papers are about ideas getting harder to find. It could be driven by the numerator, and that's the way a lot of people think about it, but it could also be driven by the denominator, which is all about resource and input and everything, right? So when you say it's harder to find, it's because we keep putting more and more input and we see a decreasing return on investment. So going back to this issue of resources, right? So if research is getting more expensive, or right, so then that's the conversation we're having. It's kind of like, who is willing who sees enough value creation to be willing to pay for that value creation. And then I think we have some disagreement about about China. I totally see China dominating until maybe America wakes up. But it's big enough; they don't need to be open. They have enough people.
Okay, so actually the time is now 5:30 exactly, and then that's when we're supposed to end. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the panel for an excellent discussion, and for your willingness to speculate and to come up with very interesting answers and speculation in response to my questions and the very good ones from the audience. So thank you very much.
All right.
It was fun.
Thanks for the questions.
Thank you, Keld.
And don't forget the Tim Networking reception, foyer 3A.
Which is where?
It's very Darwinian.
Okay. Follow Valentina.
Yeah.
Doesn't know where it is. If anyone knows, volunteer to guide us. But it's on the ground floor. That's the only thing I know.
Thank you.